Welcome to the Regenaissance Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Griggs. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Griggs. I'm the host of the Regenaissance Podcast. And today alongside me, I have Ann and Weldon Warren. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
So I guess to get started, because you said you're from Michigan. Did you grow up on a farm in Michigan?
No, but my grandparents did. So, yes, my dad was an accountant for one of the big 8 firms. But, yes, so I did not grow up in the farm. And that's actually kind of a funny story because when I married Weldon, he was a money manager in Dallas, in the city, very, very urban part of Dallas. In fact, I think we lived in Richardson.
Yeah, it's where the Galleria, there's a Galleria in Houston, and there's an even bigger Galleria complex in North Dallas. So that was really in the city.
Yes, but I'm sure
all concrete.
Once we get into our story, when our event happened in our life that kind of changed who we were. We were going to move out to the country, and people were like, "Oh, so Weldon was born and raised on a farm and ranch," and they would always look at me, "Are you from the country?" And I'd go, "The country club." And Weldon would always go, "Yeah, I'm taking the club out of her." So, anyways, I know.
So you grew up on a farm?
Yes, sir.
And then how did you find yourself in Dallas? And then you mentioned the event, but before going to the event.
This is a good part of our story is that chemicals were introduced through my dad, through the ag department of every state school in the country is always, at that time, promoting the embracement. You're embracing the chemicals so you can grow more, faster, better, except it was all chemical driven. So Monsanto became a name that we were very familiar with. There was Treflan before there was Roundup, but none of that appealed to me. If I was going to be involved in ag, I wanted it to be organic, but we didn't even know the term was organic at that time in our family. But, how you raise your animals and how you grow your crops, I wanted it to be as little
intervention,
the chemicals and all that involved. But you could see early on this is like in the late 60s and early 70s, that it was going to be a major factor on farming. Tractors got bigger and way more expensive. My granddad probably never spent more than $50,000 on a tractor. Today they're spending $500,000 on a tractor,
or even $1 million. I saw a giant combine that was sold for I think it was like $1.1 million.
Yes.
Well, there's the harvester, as they call it, or something. It's a baler, so it'll bale the cotton. Mm-hmm. It's funny how innovation works. They built this $1 million baler, and there was some engineering flaws, and they're all made of metal. And there's cotton inside that baler, and one spark from a metal-on-metal interaction, and you're going to set the bale on fire. So thousands of bells burned. And so John Deere said, well, we're going to have to go back and re-engineer. This is something wrong. But that was a $1 million baler. So when they re-engineered it, came out with it and said, we fixed the problems. Now it's $1.25 million. Yeah. So every time they made a mistake, the farmer paid for it with the increased prices. And that's just the mechanization. Farming's been evolving for years and years. I'm not sure we really weren't better off under my granddad's tutelage. I hand-picked cotton, and there wasn't any metal involved. Just picking with my hands, stuffing them in the sack that you're dragging along the ground, and then you hang it up to get your weight, and I got paid on the weight. I was only like 6 years old. I could probably have about a 50-pound sack, that I got to get
that
paid
you hauled
on.
around?
Yeah, we pulled around on the farm. I mean, we picked the whole crop that way. Yeah. And then it was the next year after I was hand-picking cotton that we had our first 2-row stripper. And you have a guy in the basket where the cotton's being blown, with an air pump, pumping that cotton back into the trailer, and he's forking it and throwing it even further back. And so.
So how'd you end up in Dallas? Why you didn't want to do that lifestyle?
I didn't want to farm.
Yeah, he didn't want to
with the
farm
introduction
with chemicals.
of chemicals and knowing what was coming. Then that really wasn't going to be a life for me.
Did your father use a lot of chemicals with cotton? Because I know with cotton in particular, especially now, it's a heavily sprayed crop.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, he went from being organic, but he didn't know he was organic. His granddad was, and so no chemicals for any reason. If you have a weed, we called it hoeing it. I wanted to be the best whore there was. and all my family, the sisters, were out there chopping cotton. So, but I didn't really want to go down that path.
But
And
your dad,
he was pretty
was very innovative as far as he went to Texas Tech, and Weldon calls it indoctrinated. But they used him to do a lot of testing, and so he was trying different crops. A lot of them GMO back
we
then.
had
That was the
them in our
beginning of all
field.
that.
Yeah.
So they were all
Test
labeled.
plots
This
is what we
one
call
is
them.
this, test plots. So his dad was very into that. But on the flip side, he was also on the ranching side. He was very innovative too, because he was one of the very first people to try AI, so artificial insemination. So
Not
yeah,
intelligence.
not intelligence, insemination. But anyway,
Insemination.
so that was so your dad was very into it, and then
I
became
grew
very
up-
dependent on all the chemicals, and so couldn't imagine, like when we finally came back into the ag space, he kept saying it's not going to work. It's a fad. You can't do it. We have to use all these chemicals. But Weldon kept saying, you didn't used to. Look back.
They didn't want to go back to such heavy dependence on labor. They wanted it to be mechanized.
Yeah.
My dad's place in history, with his degree in ag, he was on the livestock judging team at Tech. And that helped him understand the value of genetics. And so he was a big proponent of AI and artificial insemination. And so we tried a lot of different things. And through that experience, I rode around in the back of a pickup. You could do that in those days. You didn't have a seatbelt on in the back of the pickup because I was in the bed of the pickup, bouncing along. But there was always a nitrogen tank in the back of our pickup, and that's where we carried the semen that you had to keep frozen until you're going to inseminate. But we tried a lot of different things in genetics, and we've come up with, it's not something that's patented, but where you promote the betterment of the breed. So we were black and red Angus producers, but then when you do something we'll call a composite, you're blending two different bloodlines. And typically the way nature works is you get the best of both worlds. So here's a good example. We had one of the best performing bloodlines of cattle that we've ever had on our ranch was a blend of Brayford, which is a Brahma, and Hereford with a white face, Brayford, which is a really good doer on the ranch. They're hardy, they're strong, and
especially
their
for this
genetics,
climate.
for our climate. Especially as you go further into South Texas, there's even more Brahma. You get all the way into Central America, and they're all Brahma.
Right.
They've got the loose skin, so the parasites can't, parasite on them.
Right.
Because the skin's you can move half of the hide on a Brahma from one side to the other.
Really?
Yeah, it moves. It's like it's not really attached.
Yeah.
Except at the tail and the neck, and the rest of it you can move. So over there in those really wet environments where there's mosquitoes and a lot of parasites, those Brahmas are very hardy. So we're breeding a Brahma to one, we call it an F1. So it's once you deviate from your pure genetics, it's an F1 because it can't be repeated, and you can't. So anyway, we had the Brahmas being bred by one breed of Red Angus from the R.A. Brown Ranch in Throckmorton, taking those females and having them bred by another Red Angus breeder, Beaver Ranch, north of us, north of Texas. And so now you've got that composite. So you have 3/4 Red Angus and 1/4 Brahma through 3 different genetic lines. And those were just really, really good performers. They were about 50 pounds hot weight, which is the weight of the carcass, heavier than what we were already running on the Angus, and we thought the Angus were some of the very best performers. They had dark eyes, so they didn't get pink eye because the Hereford was prone to, if they have a white face, the sun will shine into their face, and the white ends up reflecting it back into their eyes, so they're getting hit twice. They're getting hit with the sun ray, and then the reflection of the sun ray from the white face, and they were prone to cancer eye, pink eye, and half the time you'd look out at a herd of Herefords and half of them didn't even have an eye. It had already, it was, once they get pink eye, they're going to lose the eye, but you still have the animal. So anyway, we did that kind of work over the years, trying to get the best breed. The best. What is the best? The most pounds for the inputs you can put into them. The most pounds of meat. The lowest death loss. They are pretty good at being easy calvers. The moms were, so you didn't lose the calf while they were calving out, which Ann has been out there with me. We've had to pull calves, or you're going to lose.
Especially when you breed too young. Everything's about time and money, But you got to get back. You got to get back to what you do. You went to college with your
that all led me to
finance.
Not wanting to be a farmer,
right?
Yeah.
And wanting to run cattle,
right?
And my dad was, doing good things with his research and being his degree in ag led him down those two different roads, either on a row crop or with the animal based. And he enjoyed the animal based, but it wasn't paying the bills as well as the row crop. And then these farmers get addicted to that money, being given to them or paid to them by the government, trying to control crops. And so it led me into the business world at Tech. So I got a degree in finance, got my master's in finance in Arizona, and went to work for Wall Street, basically. All those names. I've actually literally worked for E.F. Hutton. Everyone else says, everyone stops. There's a commercial when E.F. Hutton talks. Everyone stops talking and listens. But worked for Prudential Security, Smith Barney. There's 6 or 7 different Wall Street firms. Tried to work for Solomon Brothers, and Warren Buffett's the one that kept me from being able to work there because he wouldn't be involved in the management of the company. But a young man in his late 20s, and I'm in my early 30s, actually told the woman who was responsible for hiring the new crop of talent that I was too old. And I said, I think that's age discrimination. Oh, don't say that. Warren Buffett actually wrote a letter back to me saying, because I wrote him and said, I think this is, and I'm not wanting to blow the whistle, but if I'm qualified, I think I should be hired. And who wouldn't want to go to work right out of your graduate school with Solomon Brothers in investment banking? But I was too old in my early 30s. And so I sent a letter to Warren Buffett, and we were on a trip to Michigan, and we drove to his office in Omaha and got to actually hand him the letter the second time because I'd already mailed it. So I said, this is a photocopy of what I had sent you. He said, yeah, I know. He read it. He said, we sent you a letter basically that we can't get involved with our company, the companies we invest in. We're not going to be involved in their management and tell them what to do. And I said, well, in this case, it's kind of illegal to do what he's doing. And he said, I'm not getting involved. Sort of like with Dairy Queen. Warren Buffett's not the most, he's not in our space of health. He owns Dairy Queen, and there's no dairy in Dairy Queen. It's all synthetic.
Yeah.
The Bill Gates model.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's like, who do you really want to get in bed with? You got to be careful.
What's funny, we've been in this space for so long, 20 plus years, and we just told that to a young couple that's watching our big dog. We're not traveling with our big dog. And they both were like, what? There's no dairy. I mean, there's people who really still don't know. And it's like, oh my gosh, you didn't know this?
Yeah.
And she's known it for many years.
Yeah, Dairy Queen is a copyrighted and
it's a formula.
Yeah.
Same with Kraft cheese. It's not even. It's less than 49% cheese.
Yes.
Exactly.
Wild.
Yep.
Exactly.
And why can they even put cheese in their title? Because Kraft cheese is what is copyrighted, not the product, but that's the title of this strange product that people are eating thinking it's cheese.
And none of this is good for us.
No.
And so that's what all of us in this space have been moving away from chemically oriented foods for a long time.
Yeah.
But the rest of the United States is suffering from the way we eat.
Yeah.
And maybe RFK is going to have
we're
a
hoping.
significant influence on that.
Definitely.
And on the pharmaceutical world because they're parasiting on us. In our poor health, we have to spend more money on medicines and all of that, trying to be healthy, which is questionable. You're not really healthy. Yeah. And so in our last 25 years, we've been eating cleaner than 99% of the people, unless you're indigenous to these tribes, like what's my favorite group to talk about in Australia?
Aborigines.
The Aborigines. they eat off the land, extremely healthy, and don't want Americans to be involved and adulterate their lands or their culture, the way they eat.
Mm-hmm.
And so good for them because they're way ahead of us.
So also, I guess, rewinding back to 25 or so years ago, was there like a health event or something that changed everything for the way you all eat, and also just mentioning going out west for the farm?
So
Well,
I'm going to brag on you a little bit. So he doesn't talk much about. Yes, he has his master's in international finance, but Weldon is brilliant in all of that, and so he developed three mutual funds that were performing amazingly well, and they were under contract to be sold to an East Coast company.
Ridex. You wouldn't know
Ridex.
that name today, but they're called Pro Funds today. Pro Funds bought Ridex.
Yep. And so when 9/11 happened, and the only part of the contract that wasn't finished was that they wanted to have a presence in Texas.
Austin.
So they were thinking of moving us to Austin. We lived in Dallas at the time. But they also, because of how well these were doing in Weldon's mind, they wanted him in Maryland. So they were trying to decide. It made sense to keep Weldon in Austin, but they really wanted him at the headquarters in Maryland so he could make more of these types of funds. And so that was the one thing that wasn't finished when 9/11 happened. And those of your listeners who are in our age range, our children were kindergartners. I mean, they were just little bitties in school. I still remember, running up to the school and grabbing the kids and like, I'm taking them home. We're going to, hunker down until we figure out what's really happening. And
I watched both tires fall
in
on
his
TV.
office, yep.
And you just realize in our industry, certainly, that it's going to disrupt the marketplace, the stock market, but you don't know how long.
Yeah.
And it's like, how severe is this? And that was pretty severe.
Yeah.
So Ridex canceled the contract.
Well, they asked us to hold on.
Yeah, hold on. Just hold on.
And it's like, is it saying, how long can you hold on? All the money had drained out of the market, not all, but obviously.
Yeah.
Went
and
to cash.
Yeah.
We're sitting there just hurting when Weldon had a stroke.
Yeah.
You want to tell that
I
part?
was trying to walk upstairs. The office was upstairs. We had a 2-story house. And right about the second or third step, I just began to feel something that wasn't normal. Normally, I could just kind of run upstairs, and I couldn't run upstairs. And so I did a Texas thing, and I hollered at my wife and said, Ann, you better come in here. I said, I think I'm having a stroke. And I was, only because during college, I had worked at a hospital. And so, I knew the symptoms, knew what was kind of happening to me. What I didn't know is how bad would it be. But, I mean, one whole side of my face had drooped. My eyelid was one eyelid. So, you're split. So it's on the left side or the right side.
Yeah.
And so
But it was the right side of your face and the left side of his body. So that's what is interesting. But
story short,
he couldn't lift that left leg up. And so so we get into the car to go to the hospital. I'm laughing because I'm thoroughly embarrassed at what I'm about to tell your listeners. And I'm thinking we just need to grab something because I don't want to eat that really bad hospital food. So we get there and they're saying Weldon's first blood results, the triglycerides were off the charts. And they said if they didn't know better, they would have said, this doctor said, I would say you just ate a Big Mac, literally. And in my innocence, I looked at him and said, is a Whopper just as bad? So I drove my husband.
That's another Warren Buffett company.
Yes, I drove my husband through Burger King on the way to the hospital while he's having a stroke.
Yeah.
Yes, it was just
Probably
overwhelming.
made it worse.
I know it. I know people are thinking, seriously, I
kill
wouldn't
me.
be that dumb, but I thought it was a great idea. So,
Everyone wants to eat for
right.
$1.
But that's who we
per
were. We
meal.
were absolutely standard American family. We knew there was a little Mexican restaurant where we could take all 4 kids and all of us could eat for like $15. We were definitely of that mindset. We were involved in Boy Scouts and soccer and baseball and swimming and all these things. So we were the family on the move, grabbing fast food all the time.
Yeah.
All the kids were on a swim team.
Yep, all of that. And Weldon had a pretty high pressure job and always watching the market, always making decisions until all of a sudden life stopped. It stopped for us. God just took us by the shoulders and said, "This isn't where I want you."
But you can look at the tea leaves that we had been given and see where he was taking us.
Yes, definitely.
Because we had already been introduced to grass-fed beef. There was a ranch south Fort Worth, and there was a Texas Monthly article that had come out about what they were doing. And so I'm reading that, and it's like, wow, they're just doing cattle the way my granddad did, 40, 50 years ago, just pasture-based. Everything was organic. For my grandparents, we had about a 1-acre orchard, about a 1-acre garden. Then we had all the little fruit berries like blackberries and raspberries, and they just lived off their farm. He had one cash crop. He divided his farm into 4 sections, and one was for the cash crop that we were going to sell and actually make money, and all the rest was for the cattle and the animals, the chickens, and everything that's on the ground to make a living. And, of course, what they left behind was really good for the soil.
And 1/4 of those 4 quarters was always laid furlough. So
Well, it was,
as you rotated around.
Yeah, so it's always, we rotated it, and there was always 1/4 that the cattle were grazing. My granddad would plant a winter crop and a summer crop of grain, like wheat and sorghums, for the cattle to graze.
But they were grazing the grass of those grains. They didn't
Yes.
eat the grain heads of those grains. That's
No, you
important.
graze it when it's vegetated.
Right.
It's really green.
Right.
And that grass is higher in protein, and so it's really good for the animals. Most of our grazing was on different kinds of Bermudas. There's many different strains of that, genetics. And so that's the way my granddad made a living. He ate his own animal proteins, the chickens, the pigs, and
Beef. Beef.
Our neighbors in town, you'd hear this one friend of mine, his mom, had just wrung the neck of a chicken. Just here it is, you're swinging it around, and eventually comes apart, and the chicken runs around and pumps out blood until its time is over and it dies. But then they ate it that night,
Right.
And so we grew up in that type of environment, pretty rural, and people living off the land, and we were all pretty healthy then as kids. And then we got introduced into the modern world. My mom, wanted to move into that world because it was easier to cook, white flour, white bread, which meant it didn't have any bran or germ in it, which meant it really wasn't healthy for us.
Right.
Wonder Bread was wonder because they had removed the bran and the germ from the flour, and that had a infinite shelf life.
Right.
Yeah, I grew up eating Wonder Bread, so
You did?
yeah.
Yeah,
You
you
know.
know that.
It was a soft, gooey thing.
Yeah.
But wasn't healthy for us at all.
Right.
No.
But freshly milled, people don't realize that, because I know there's a lot of people in the carnivore space. They're like, I'll never touch any grain at all. But freshly milled, when you go back, Jesus called himself the bread of life. And all through the whole Bible, it's all about fasting on bread and water.
The thrashing.
All of that. So eating freshly milled, literally milling the bread, milling the grain and baking it immediately makes it a protein. It also has a lot of carbs. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, but it's a very nutritious thing.
Yeah.
Like even raw milk, existing on raw milk only, some people are that compromised. It's possible, and it's a very nutritious thing. Raw milk is actually very nutritious. But anyways, that's
Then the city
deviating.
takes
Sorry.
over, and they try to have their dairy in the city, and that's what it was so polluted in that environment. They called it swill.
Yep, swill milk.
Yeah, and that The Devil's in the Milk is a
Yes.
good book.
That's a great book.
For your listeners to go and read and really get a better understanding of the evolution of milk.
Oh, yeah.
And the raw milk, that was very common. It was the preferred way to drink milk
yeah.
in the old days, and it's coming back. And we've been drinking raw milk for 25 years.
That's why I'm wearing a Make Milk Raw Again hat,
Yeah, I
and my
love it.
sweatshirt is Raw is Lost. So I'm there with
Raw
you
is
on all
law.
that.
Yes, yes.
So we're really
yes.
big proponents of that.
Yes.
We had our own dairy cow,
Okay.
because of our mentality. If I'm going to go do that and I'm on the farm, there's probably a good purpose for that. And I probably we had one Jersey dairy cow. So the brown-hided cattle are the best. They have the most protein in their milk. And so we had the Jersey, Guernsey, and the brown Swiss as an option. So we found one of our dairies that was going to be selling a Jersey. She was only 4 years old, but her production had dropped below 5 gallons a day, and that was their mark. If she's not producing more than that, we're selling her. So I got to buy her for like $300, and she raised more than 30 what I'd call orphans, where the mom had died giving birth. The calf was alive, but very few ranchers or farmers are going to want to bottle feed that little calf to an age where it's sustainable on its own. It can go out in the pasture and graze. And so they'd bottle feed for a while, but if I could put her on a dairy cow, she would raise that calf. And so our little Bessie, as we called her, she raised more than 30 over a 10-year period. So that's 3 a year.
Was this when growing up or
No,
whenever you
with
guys?
our family.
Okay.
Once
When
we
we'd
moved
moved
to
from the city,
Okay.
and I put her into the country.
Yes.
So I'm
yes.
curious then, before that, and so the stroke happened, how did you get from that point to, where you're at, to where you have the cow and you have the farm?
Well, we read the article. I went and visited this guy. He let me come out and just follow him around for a day, and he said, this is a really simple business. If you have grass, you can put, cattle. That's all it takes for a cow to survive and to do well. You supplement minerals, but he had this grass-fed finished operation going on, and he was doing well. And he said, so if you own land and you want to get out in the country, you can do this. So we moved to the Graham area.
Well, but so let's back up just a second. In the hospital, the doctor told us
Yeah, this is a good story.
that they were going to manage Weldon's decline. And when you hear that and you have 4 little kids in that kindergarten age range, you just are like, wait, what? And so Weldon said, and he had been doing a lot of reading about this grass-fed. I really think it was a God thing. God allowed him to read about this before the stroke happened. But he said, can I just change my diet and exercise? Because we had been doing none of that. We'd been a fast food family. And the doctor looked at him and said, food has nothing to do with your health. Nothing.
I mean,
And
he really said that.
He really said that. And Weldon, just being stubborn West Texas man, even though we were in Dallas, just said, and just never took the medication, never did all that. But it was at that point that we really couldn't hold on financially anymore. So we hit bottom. We hit bottom financially. We hit bottom health-wise. And so we had to move. And Weldon said, we're going to go back. And we tried to come back home to West Texas, but his dad and brother were like, no, this is a fad. No way, you're not coming back. And so that was weird to us too. So getting rejected to where we had to do something. I tell my people all the time, I call them my tribe. You have to reach a point in your life where you can seriously say, I surrender myself to you, God. You're God. For me, it's Jesus. But for whoever, I surrender myself to you, God. Take care of everything, and literally be able to lay it down and let it go. And that's kind of where we were. We had hit bottom in all retrospects of our lives. And luckily, an opportunity opened up in the Graham, Texas area for Weldon to manage a ranch for an owner that was not on site. But
he was my age.
Yeah, he was. But his mother, his very elderly mother, was there, and so she needed someone like us. She needed Weldon, to be a man there in case who knows what, and then me to be the compassionate one. If she needed help, which she did occasionally, we had to take her to the hospital more than once. We cooked her meals. We just became involved. But that opening up, that very first year, we ate one of the open heifers. Mm. So we were able, that very first year we went to the ranch, we were able to get that animal in our freezer and learn how to cook it, because it cooked differently, and learn, because his brother kept saying it's going to be yellow fed, it's going to be too tough, it's going to be terrible, but learn how to kind of master every cut, but also enjoy it. And we did. And it was that first year, Weldon, immediately we had chickens, which is a funny story about
chickens,
a chicken,
geese,
snakes,
ducks,
and we ended up
rabbits.
having all that stuff eventually, but our boys went from being in the city, little bitty boys, to carrying little 22s on their shoulder and coming home with little rabbits. It was, oh my gosh. And one boy, we used to call him Eagle Eyes. he could see things that the other boy was just, you know,
Oblivious to.
oblivious. And he would pull him off of snakes more than once. So we did deal with
Poisonous snakes, like
copperheads, rattlesnakes, the whole 9 yards.
Copperhead doesn't have rattlers to warn you.
Yeah,
so
you have to.
They're more deadly because you're more likely to step on them.
Yep. So all of those first few years was a huge lifestyle change for me, back home for Weldon. But in that time, because our kids were still little, we still went to birthday parties. We ate hot dogs at the ball field. So it wasn't a super clean diet. Although ironically, we were grinding our own grain. I didn't know the health benefits then. It was more of we lived too far from town and cost savings.
Yeah.
But he was out in the pasture every day. He was getting sun rather than being in an office every day. He was walking 5-10 miles in the pasture every day with the cattle, doing stuff. So we brought in an element of exercise that wasn't part of our city life because, yes, we ran around with the kids, but he himself was doing that. So we radically changed all of our proteins, and radically changed what he was doing with his body. So he was out in the sun and walking, moving constantly. And I don't know how many years it was, 5 years before we got another full body scan, or was it closer to 7? What was it?
I don't know if we've recorded that.
Yeah.
We could go back and look.
We'd
but
have to go back and look.
It's fewer than 10
Yes.
and more than 5.
Yeah, so we'll say roughly 7 years. We had the opportunity to get a full body scan, and his plaque that was 50% blocked in his carotids and all 6 arteries of his heart were clean. And the guy said, and by this point, Weldon was now, because that happened in his 40s, so he was at the early 50s. He said, if I didn't know better, I'd say these are 30-year-old arteries. And we're going, and really, so now we're super health foodie.
I can't believe that one doctor said that food has nothing to do with that.
He's literally said food has nothing
Like
to do.
I've talked to a lot and heard a lot, but that might top everything I've ever heard from a doctor.
And he was trained
Food
in a
has
medical school, but it's a Rockefeller med school.
All
Yeah.
of them
So
are.
they don't really care
Yeah,
about
no,
health.
for sure. That still just mind boggles me that
Yes.
nothing.
And we brought Weldon, he's so headstrong. He brought his scans back to show that doctor, and that doctor took time and he looked at him and he went, it's a miracle. You can thank God, but I don't think food had anything to do with it. He still stood on the ground that food had nothing to do with it. It was a miracle, and God was very much involved in all of that for us. And there's no denying that. But it was God showing us how important food on the fork is to healing your bodies. So.
And so since then, we have eaten really clean.
Yes, now we do.
We probably eat 95% clean, and it has continued to sustain us, and we're healthier than not. We do now do things that are more conventional, being athletic. We play pickleball, golf. At one
ride
point,
bikes. We ride bikes all over.
all over Lubbock.
Yeah.
I'm curious then for you two, because, for farmers and ranchers, they obviously want to provide good food for themselves, their families, and local communities.
Mm-hmm.
But just everything that you went through with, the stroke and everything after that, how has that helped just shape how you view farming and ranching and providing, food?
That's a great question. So because being in this industry, we've had a chance to actually develop a friendship with Will Harris. We've met Joe Salatin many times. Weldon and Will actually sat on an FSIS, which is the label, governmental label division,
The USDA.
way back, to come up with the proper grass-fed label. And then when Obama took office, his administration actually killed that label and said all cattle eat grass. So it became a very muddy area, and now they're trying to clean it up again and make it a more pure. If it says grass-fed, it really means something. But all of that.
Tom Vilsack is the head of the USDA, and he's the one that withdrew,
Rescinded.
and literally stamped it withdrawn, and we still have a copy of that. The grass-fed label was withdrawn, and he said all cattle eat grass at some point in their life, so they can all be labeled grass-fed. And they let big industry know that was going to be coming. And so by then we'd begun to sell beef retail, and it became a little bit more of a cash flow sustainable thing for us. and our business dropped by 30%
Overnight.
overnight. The month after they came out with that new label, Walmart, Costco, they all had
Sam's.
grass-fed.
Like
And
they had
we came up with the
literally
label and we knew they weren't grass-fed. It's like, how
grass-fed
do you do
lasagna.
this?
I mean, it was such a crony capitalistic move that happened. Everybody was waiting, and as soon as it was signed, within the next week or two, there was grass-fed lasagna at Sam's. I mean, that kind of stuff doesn't happen overnight that fast. So it was definitely a thing. But anyways, to get back to where do we see ourselves? So Will Harris has said this multiple times. We have said it too. We're not someone that needs to scale. We're fairly big because we supply Whole Foods and we supply in the Southwest region and we supply a couple other wholesale people, and our retail business is fairly good. And so it's coming into that relationship and replicating what we're doing. Therein lies what really needs to happen.
That's
So
why you need to know your rancher,
and
know where your food comes from.
yes, and that whole shake your rancher's hand, concept, it's a really valid thing. Learn where your food comes from, but meet the people, be grateful for them, help them in any way you can, and you'll be amazed. So when 2020 happened, all the meat flew off the shelves at all the grocery stores. As did ours too. We pride ourselves in carrying a lot of stock, so that if someone comes and says, I want to buy a whole animal, we don't say, okay, it's 30 days out. We don't work that way. It's like, okay, I can get that for you tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
We have the ability to carry that much stock, and all of our stock turns over within 2 months anyway. So it's not like we're building up and holding, but all the freezers were emptied. And so every 2 weeks we put down animals for our retail. So every 2 weeks the freezers would fill back up and be gone in a day or two because people were waiting. Well, Weldon was like, I feel like I'm playing God. We had people calling just out of the woodwork, I need meat. And he's like, okay, we're grass-fed and grass-finished. I don't care, I need meat. Well, are you on a health journey? I just need meat. And so Weldon was like, I can't supply you. And telling people no, because we had to protect our own.
Yeah.
And I had like at that point, about 85% of our customer base were really health-oriented, health-compromised people, either compromised or just really health-oriented. But two people stand out in my mind. One woman has a child that just couldn't eat anything but our product. And so they were pretty compromised. She would cry, text, call, I have to have meat, because, the government put so much fear into that whole COVID scene. And people bought into it. I even, for the first 2 weeks, I remember my son saying, okay, the world shut down for 2 weeks. I'm going to Houston to see my friends. No, if you leave Lubbock and you bring it back to Lubbock and it's my son who brings it, just being overly dramatic. But then I got it together and was like, and luckily we were considered essential, so we never slowed down, never wore masks, only under protest
but
did
we
wear
did find
masks.
a really good all-natural protocol to disinfect the lungs. Anything upper respiratory would be disinfected. And so we did get COVID several times, but it didn't take us down. 3 days, we were over it.
He definitely, and that was the true COVID, loss of sense of smell and taste.
Yeah.
But he was only down about 3 days and then back on the tractor on the day 4. So when I finally got it, talk about how stressed, we were talking about that before we got on air. I tried to get it from him because I knew I was going to, so why not? So I still stayed in our same bed, and I obviously helped him through and all that. And I wanted it. I never did catch it from him. But eventually I had to rehome a very beloved dog because this dog the grandchildren were coming into our life, and the dog was biting the grandchildren. So it was a very sad thing. The dog wanted me and anyone else to share my lap.
It was a really smart dog.
Yes.
Actually, same thing happened to me during COVID. To where
Really?
Because the dog almost attacked the girl I was dating. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I relate to that because I had to return him immediately after that.
And it was so emotionally draining that I had to do this. So when I got COVID, I was sick for really sick for 2 weeks because I was all that cortisol. So anyways, but to get back to where, I'm sorry, we deviate a lot. Please forgive us. To get back, it's in replicating who we are. And I remember this lady calling about, am I going to get meat? when you come into relationship with the people who provide your food, those people are endeared. And 100% I was not letting down this lady whose child was so compromised. So we had strangers who were right there on our doorstep. I'll give you more than you want for this meat. And it's like, no, because I have to take this to Dallas to feed this family. And we have another young lady that lives in New Mexico. She is so immune compromised. She can only eat 4 foods, 3 vegetables. I don't even know what those vegetables are, and our primal ground beef. She can eat our ground beef if she has to, but putting all that extra liver and kidney and all the organs, she does way better on it. We tend to be more of what we call in the business a stalker rather than cow calf. We have some calves, but it's not by choice always. So we have ranches that are certified, American grass-fed certified, that raise calves for us, and then we'll finish them on the West Texas grass. We were really droughty, and so we were having a hard time getting our ranchers in West Texas to give us the amount of cattle we needed. So we started sourcing from the southern part of Oklahoma, and this woman who was so immunocompromised, she immediately knew the difference. I mean, we didn't tell people, it was just this person certified, it still works, and it's cattle. But the histamines or whatever is in the cattle and what they were being finished on, she's like, what did you change? And so we don't source from them anymore. We're back and only really source from our people out in West Texas and part of New Mexico. But for a while, she couldn't even eat our beef because she was that sensitive. But that comes into play. And she actually, one out of how many thousands of customers we have, had a role in us deciding that's not where we want to pull our beef from. Yeah. So, and that's what it is. That's the beauty of coming into a relationship with your rancher or your food supplier. I've come in. I buy my produce from a local person who grows, and you just get a box, and I'll say, oh, I don't really eat that, but this, and if you ever get this. And so she started planting whatever, I can't even remember what it was. She wasn't growing, but she started planting that so that we could get whatever it was that I wanted. That's the relationship you want. Those people want to serve you because you're helping them. They've got the gift of farming or ranching or gardening, and you'll have another gift, that they need. Like our daughter does most of all of our social media now, but before she did all that, when she was too busy building her career and couldn't carve out enough time, it was a customer that came up and helped us with our social media, and we bartered. So we were able to help. We gave her beef for her family, and she gave us a presence that we needed online. We're far better ranchers than we are at social media, so we leave it to y'all to take care of that. But it is, and to me, we were talking about that outside, and it is in that relationship, and not only knowing where your food comes from, but knowing how long it takes for your food to become your food. That's really, really important. So,
well, that's why I always try to get people to visit a farm or ranch too, is because you see it all, and then once you actually talk to the person that does all the work and hear their stories, and then you put the puzzle pieces together, that's when you realize how much goes into all of this.
Yes,
and that's why I know. Again, we were talking before this. Why I always say that to me, the root of all of humanity's problems is our disconnection from our food. Mm-hmm. Because even just hearing the story you're sharing about trading with community, yes. I mean, that's how we were.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Back in the 1800s, that's how they were.
Yep.
You would be growing food, but then you would also be trading with your neighbors.
Yep. 100%.
And
everyone has a specialty.
Yep.
And so you don't have to do it all. There's someone in your group that can do what what they can do better, and so you let them do it.
Yep. Yep.
And we all depend on one another.
And it's amazing when you bring that up in conversation, even in today's market, how many people are still willing to barter? A magazine, a local magazine, wanted to run an article on Weldon and our ranch and everything. And we were like, oh, we should take an ad out and let's run it for a couple issues. And the lady said, will you barter? And we're like, oh, absolutely, we'll barter. So we're getting a presence in what she's good at, this magazine that we have no idea how to put together a magazine or reach the people that she's reaching. And she's getting our beef in exchange. And so there's so much good symbiotic, relationship going on when you can barter. You feel really good. Our next door neighbor, we've been having some of the bad storms. I think have they been hitting here? Okay, so we've been, anyways, tree branches half broken off all over. And so our next door neighbor, he has come to our rescue. He's got a chainsaw and he's like, I'll do this. And we're like, we'll pay you in beef. And so he's so sweet. And anyway, so it's just a really feel good. He's so excited to get our beef, and we're so excited to get his strength, youthfulness, and take care of our trees. So
I'm curious then too, because so going back to at the height of the pandemic, mentioning just how many people were trying to buy your products.
Yes.
But now with the whole Maha movement and, more and more folks are waking up to the disconnection from food and just everything else, are you still seeing just, I guess, the amount of people wanting to buy beef from you all like it was at the height of the pandemic? Or where is that now from, I guess, the consumer side from your perspective?
So, no. You want to answer this?
Well, the pandemic just changed everything.
Yeah.
And then it's unfortunate that now we've learned that was a whole lot of just, it was mostly fake.
Right, correct.
Fauci got immunity from President Biden because he had done some really bad things. And people suffered. Many people died that shouldn't have died.
Right.
And they kept the easy solutions like what we did with we're not doctors. We didn't do any, we weren't medical, but we're in the healthcare space. And so we were promoting nebulizing hydrogen peroxide with iodine in it. And it's a really simple recipe, and doctors have been using it for generations, but the CDC wouldn't approve it. Fauci wouldn't approve it. Your local hospitals wouldn't approve it, but it would save your life. When you're nebulizing, and you nebulize for about an hour, and you're going to nebulize about, in a little vial, this much hydrogen peroxide, it disinfects your lungs.
No. It's the solution was this much, but it's only a few drops. It's anywhere from 10 to 50 drops of hydrogen peroxide.
It's mostly,
food grade.
Yeah.
But the rest of it is saline, pure saline, and then one drop, literally only one drop of iodine.
One drop of iodine, about 30 drops of the hydrogen peroxide, and that just disinfects your lungs.
And 100 drops of
saline.
saline.
And we had all these people, a lot of students, where one person gets COVID, and the roommates say, "You're out. You're moving out.
Yes.
You got to go rent an apartment and go to the hotel, but you can't stay here." And we just housed them because we already knew what this was. We had many people we had an extra bedroom. They came and stayed with us, got to eat our food. We provided the nebulizer and the formulas. It was very easy to do. And we think we helped a lot of people get healthier.
Right. And not just the ones we housed, really our entire customer base. I mean, just sharing that. So, but as far as like the demand of food goes, that was an anomaly. That was, it lasted about 3 months, maybe 4, from the end of March through July-ish. Yeah. And then things kind of settled in the supply chain, and they figured out how to supply the stores on a more regular. So the fair-weathered people were definitely fair-weathered people. We still struggle with, there's in the marketplace, if you go into a grocery store and there's ground beef that is labeled grass-fed, is it legit or not? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And therein lies a really unfortunate thing for the consumer.
Legitimate, they're going to go to the trouble to get certified. So we have 2 certifications that we really think help the consumer understand that we are doing what they would think we're doing. So we have the American Grass-Fed Association, which means those cattle are only eating something green. It might be tree leaves, that's still green.
It might even be hay.
And the grasses that we grow are all green. So that's good for them. And where was I going with that?
GAP.
The other one was GAP, Global Animal Partnership, which is more of an animal husbandry. We don't have electric hot shots on the farm.
Right.
If there's some reason we're needing to get an animal where it needs to go to get on a trailer so it can be processed, if they're going to get out or they're going to get wound up and have a lot of adrenaline flow, we just back them out and let them live another day, another week, another 2 weeks, whatever it is. It's better for the meat, it's better for the animal. So that's that standard of global animal partnership. You can't have a hot shot. You can't abuse your animals.
Right, it's animal welfare.
Very animal welfare.
So you mentioned too briefly about during the Obama administration they dropped the label, or can you elaborate on that whole ordeal?
Well, that was the Secretary of Ag.
Yeah, Tom Vilsack.
Tom
yeah.
Vilsack just withdrew the label, and it wasn't. They weren't going to promote it. They weren't going to try to validate it. But the practitioners out in the country, like us, we still believed it. But the grocery stores could buy animals. This is a funny part of the USDA. It's supposed to be raised in the U.S., and so they can import it from any country. Venezuela, Colombia, Argentina. It comes in when it hits the border, the plane or the truck. They relabel a product of the USA, and you're good. It's just relabeling, and that's okay with the USDA. But it wasn't okay to have a grass-fed label. Certainly one that was valid, or where they were really, there was a certain protocol of being grass-fed, and most of the animals around Austin, many animals, the ranchers around here are selling into your local marketplace, and they're telling their customers that this is a grass-fed product because they're on the pasture 99% of the time. If there's a storm blowing through, those kind of groups allow for nature to take place. And so you don't want your animals to be abused to just have the label. You want to shelter them and you want to feed them correctly. We had that big snowstorm, Goliath, in 2001? No, 2020. Anyway, we had ice on the ground for 10 days. They can't get to the grass. So you can go out there and you can feed hay, or you can feed a processed food, which isn't the best thing for them, but it keeps them alive. So keeping the animal alive supersedes the health of the animal. Once the event passes, you get back to your normal protocol, and the animal's going to regain its health if it lost any of its health. But cattle actually do very well in cold weather and rain. They're at their best in Mother Nature. They know how to survive. They go find water, eat the ice. I mean, this went on for 2 weeks with the Goliath, and instead of losing any animals, our ranch manager was able to pin something like 35 animals of other ranchers' animals. We had a pen that was on the farm market road. It was easy. He's horseback all the time, so he'd just see an animal out there, and he goes, "It's not ours, but it's someone's," and he'd go get it, put it in our pasture or our pens, and over about a month period of time, they all found their animals and came and got them. So you're just trying to take care of the animal and your local, rancher who lost an animal that's valuable to him.
Well, that's what I love about that is you all collectively get it. So when something like that, you just want to help. That's what I noticed a lot with just the whole agriculture community. Mm-hmm. I shared a video about a month ago to where I believe this was in Colorado, to where neighboring farm had this massive fire that they couldn't contain. So he quickly went and got his tractor, and you could just see him going around helping out, and it worked.
Yes.
And that's just why I'm so grateful for, because to me, I always say, I say Twitter saved my life, but it led me to agriculture, and the folks in the community saved my life because, I don't know, it's just something about just all of the earth folks that just, again, want to provide good quality food for yourselves and your loved ones, and whether that might be your actual direct family or your community, but then also the actual land piece aspect too. Because again, I always go back to the disconnection from our food. So this was 2022. I worked on a farm in Pennsylvania, and I mean, I was in rural Pennsylvania, population of 2,500. I'd never experienced rural America at all. Never thought I was ever going to do that. And I just remember that first day, how the property was. It was pretty flat, but then just straight hills, essentially both sides. I just remember being on top of the hill and just staring out. It's hard to put into words what that experience is like. That's why I always say, go shake your rancher's hand too. Is I can't put into words what that experience is like.
Right. It's really...
It's almost an out-of-body experience.
Yes.
Because it's so spiritual.
Yeah, very.
So our country, our society, the way all of we were that family, kids involved in a million different things. By the time you graduate high school, you're just pushed to have the best resume to get into the best college, and you're being pushed and you're being driven. Really what needs to happen is you graduate high school, and the next year you should be in ag. You should be sent to spend a year where you take time to mature and you take time to come into yourself and not just be this, push. Because, even with our kids, our one son who's now running the company, graduated very close to the top of his class. I think he was number 5, and went in and, pledged while he took all these massive classes, chemistry, engineering, physics, all these really difficult classes, and bombed, because he was ill prepared. High school was easier for him, and being pushed to party that hard with all the fraternity people, all of that. And the better thing would have been for him to finish that high school and get back into the ranch, spend a year, getting your hands dirty, or giving back in service. Maybe not everyone needs to be an ag, but spend a year giving your time serving others.
And they have those kind of programs.
And then come back and go to college. And if you're meant to be an accountant, great. An engineer, great. All of those things. And not everybody's going to bomb their first year, but it just seems like we're so ill prepared to be mature. And when you have those types of experiences like you're talking about in Pennsylvania, you really matured. You really you felt your own calling. You felt your own, who am I? And you had to come to Jesus moment. You had this, who do I want to be? Mm-hmm. And that's speaking more of character rather than career.
Yeah.
Because careers are, I don't want to say this, but careers are easy. And Weldon and I certainly I didn't spend 4 years in college, and Weldon spent 6-7 years in college to become a grass-fed beef rancher. That was a God thing, So,
yeah, same for me. I went to school
right?
for 6 years, and now I'm doing all this, yeah.
Right? So you
heavily.
get that,
Yeah.
yes. My degree was telecommunications, and it's funny because I'm terrible at it now. I'm like, can you help me work this remote? And my grandkids help me with my phone, and it's hilarious. But so the career is always, you can always undo, but the character is what needs to develop. And having those moments where you're kind of one with the earth, and one with the animals, and one just, with Mother Nature, just makes you so much more a better character, better person.
I'm curious, and from your perspectives, going from Dallas to, I know it took a life event such as the stroke with
Right.
you to really change that. But in thinking of just the younger generations, because I think about this every single day, the fact that the average age of farmer ranchers is nearly 60. Most
Right.
don't have an heir.
Right.
Clinton, the Raries, Fafo Farms, they made a comment on Twitter how they're, I think, 35 or 36, but then they're considered young
Mm-hmm.
in the space.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think, this is a really loaded question, how can we try to get younger generations invested or interested in this whole world that we're just so seemingly disconnected from?
I have one word,
Good.
an agrihood. And that's, what's the other term I use?
I don't know.
Instead of agrihood, I say it's homesteading.
Homesteading.
When you're homesteading, if more and more people, we were very agrarian 100 years ago, and now most people have moved to the city for the convenience, but now there's a new movement where people are moving out of the city and back into the country, and we'll call it an agrihood, a community of people. They all have their different specialties, but maybe on 150 acres, there's 15 different families living there. They're not trying to farm because it takes thousands of acres to have enough land to produce a cash crop. But if you're living in an agrihood, you're all kind of interdependent on one another, and you all have a different specialty. One lady's got her 2 milk cows, but that produces 10 gallons a day. She's not drinking all that every day, or her family. She's going to sell it to her community. And then they're making, butter and cream and this is what we did. We had that Bessie, our Jersey dairy cow. But everyone has their own little specialty, and they're symbiotic. They all work together, and they come together and have work days. It's sort of like the Mennonites, when they're raising a barn,
They all raise it together.
they all do it together, and it's cheaper and it's fast, and you can build a barn in 3 or 4 days and it's done. And no one's getting paid. They're all just serving their community. And so there's a lot of these communities popping up all around. And here in Austin, one is fairly close in Waco. And what's the name of that one?
Oh, I can't remember.
It's a really very vibrant community. Every family has their own specialty in what they're providing to that community, but they all live there for free. If you want a big house, you build it, but the community is going to come in and help. But it's not about the materialness of that, the wealth of it. It is that they're all just, contributing to the community. There's restaurants there, but all that, they don't have any motorized like tractors. It's all pulled by animals. They're doing it the old way. They have a windmill that's pumping the water, and then it's because it's got pressure behind it with that windmill, they're pushing that water up into a cistern that then they'll use that gravity flow from the cistern to water the garden. They're not doing anything with electricity. So when the sun goes down, they quit working, or they move their work inside where it's more familiar for them. But there's going to be more and more of that happening, where people are moving to agri-hoods and doing homesteading. We had this young group, these 2 women, their sisters or sister-in-laws, that came to us and tell me quickly or write it down or however how to begin to homestead. And they followed, what I suggested. They went out and they bought 10 acres. They built their homes there, and then they've leased some other land. And every so often they're going to one of the local ranches, or they bought some from us, where they'll buy the whole animal, still alive, grazing in the pasture, and then they'll put it down. And there's a way to do it generationally, sort of where you can always have meat in your freezer, and you contributed to the way it was raised on the grass. And so that's very holistic. And these girls did it based on our advice. We talked to them probably 3 or 4 times, and then they went out and actually did it. And then they sent me a photo of the first time they packed the entire beef into one of their freezers. They opened the hood, the tops of this, and they said, the animal is in the freezer now. So we're not food insecure anymore. And we already have the next one ready. It's out on the grass today. So when we finish eating this animal, as you would call it, we're going to have another one. And so they've kind of taken control of those parts of their life where they feel vulnerable to the grocery store. And during that time is when we had COVID, and they weren't panicking over that.
Right.
They had their own freezer full of beef.
Yep.
Or it could be pork, chickens. We had geese, ducks, rabbits on our farm, and you can eat them all.
I think today's young people, I feel for them because they're so pushed. Their endorphins are coming from the blue light on their screens, and
It's an entirely different world.
it is.
Because I'm a millennial. I was born in '93,
Right.
and I know every generation's always like, you had it, childhood was way better than yours.
Right.
But I feel like that true as a true millennial, because I didn't get a cell phone until I was 8th grade.
Right.
It wasn't an iPhone, it was a flip phone.
Right.
And then obviously the evolution said iPhone.
Yeah.
Social media, I got Facebook in 8th grade, Twitter a little bit, but not a whole lot. That wasn't until college.
Right.
And so I had the actual true childhood of being outside, still was inside playing video games and doing all that stuff. But I didn't have this to where I was tossed at this as I feel so bad for the younger generations for
I do
that.
too.
Because it does make you addicted.
It does.
All the science is behind it to where
Yes.
you can't deny that. And
Right.
So
And what used to be when you go back even before our childhood, the endorphins were from eating meat. I mean, you literally, when you ate that steak or you ate that roast, you just had that, that moment. And so, taking kids hunting, taking kids out, like you're saying, our grandchildren, we're so blessed. They're outside 90% of the time. We're so lucky that our son and daughter-in-law are raising them that way. And yes, they're on scooters. Yes, they're on bikes, and they're not living on the ranch. But they're outside, and they're also digging in the dirt and with the ants. And they found a possum. They were so excited. And anyway, so that's what needs to happen. There needs to be a conscious decision by your generation to raise your babies.
Mm-hmm.
But for those who have children that are already kind of addicted, there has to be a conscious decision of, you know what, we're only going to do this for 30 minutes a day, and we're going to be outside for an hour and a half. There has to be a 75-25 shift. You have to make that decision so that, and if it seems like it's overwhelming, get the kids involved in something that's outdoors. So rather than just saying, get outside and figure it out, find something that the family can do outdoors or that they can do outdoors. Build a fort. Here's hammer and nails. Go out there, do something so that there's a shift. And once they start working with their hands and less with their thumbs, then I think you'll begin to see that change. But it has to be a conscious decision by your generation and the generation right above you to make that change. And we're lucky because in the space that we're in, we get to meet people like you, and we just get so excited. This young couple that's watching our big dog at home, they're newly married, very, very young, and she said she was homeschooled and she was raised holistically and all this, but then they're the ones that didn't know there was no dairy in Dairy Queen. So there's still a long way to go, even with those that are young and that think they're becoming more holistic. So we all of us in the health space have got to continue to have these kind of podcasts. We have to continue to be willing to stand on a stage and tell our stories and say, it makes a difference. That doctor that said food doesn't make a difference, that's not true. We've got to be able to do that. In fact, we watched a movie. I wanted to share this with your listeners. We watched a movie. Matthew McConaughey was in it. It's called Dallas Buyers Club. Very, very old movie about he had AIDS. The character had
great
AIDS.
Movie. Yep.
He, too, was told you have 30 days to live. And the United States of America, and I'll stand behind it, the greatest country in the world, but it's very corrupt at the top, or was. We're hoping, Make America Healthy Again is going to change a lot of that. But they knew there were cures out there, not cures, but even life-extending drugs and pharmaceuticals. But mainly, the point of the story is Matthew ends up going down to Mexico, and there was a doctor down there that was going to give him something that was illegal in the United States. It was a pharmaceutical that was going to help elongate his life. So, long story short, from being told he was going to die in 30 days, he lived more than 7.5 years longer. There were times when the United States legally would not even let him have access to that drug. So his health, he probably, if he could have had it and been left alone to get it from Mexico, he probably could have lived longer, more like 10 or 12 years. So he was very, very immunocompromised, not just from the virus of AIDS and all of that, but from his lifestyle, which he was doing drugs. He was heavy alcoholic. He was eating crap. I mean, lots of crap. So that doctor who lost his license in the United States, willing to set up shop in Mexico to do the right thing, the very first thing he said to the character, and Matthew is not the character's name, forgive me, whoever that character was, because I don't remember, but was, you got to change your lifestyle. You have to eat healthy. Yes, I can help you elongate your life through this, but not if you're going to fight me by eating crap and by drinking too much and doing drugs. And so Matthew's character immediately stopped doing drugs, cut way back on the drinking, and ate healthy, and literally went to the grocery store for the first time in his life rather than a fast food place, and actually ate whole foods. That is the shift that needs to change, because being given a death sentence in 30 days to bind yourself more than 7.5 years because you changed your diet?
Yep.
Well,
that's what's really will be interesting, because there's going to be a lot of people that will eventually make that change, but then there's going to be a lot of people that still will try to think that Ozempic will be the way, and and all these other. That's what's just. I know we talked before this too on just a massive need for the culture shift of
yes.
how we view time preference essentially, and thinking that everything can be fixed within a day or week,
Right.
rather than realizing that no, this is going to take years,
Right.
especially with Americans now.
Yes. So I want to address Ozempic just really quickly. Obviously, people need to understand body image. It's really not about weight. It's about health. How do you feel? And so if you do have swollen joints, all of this obviously conjugated linoleic acid, omega-3s, really, really high in grass-finished beef. I'm going to tout that right here, but that will all help with that inflammation. However, find people. What I think is cool is finding people who were mainstream that you see God has now moved over. Dr. Casey Means, brilliant, brilliant doctor, was a surgeon, but God has taken her out of the health, out of the pharmaceutical, medical, and allowed her brilliance to find things that rival Ozempic that are more natural. It's called like the pink salt trick, or it's called the pink salt trick or the pink salt cure or something like that. Anyways, look for people who are willing to go head to head with these what seems to be a fad, but no one's telling you about all the side effects. Mm-hmm. And so look for those type of people. I don't know enough. I don't take Dr. Casey Means product, but I'm aware that it's out there, and I'm aware of who she is and that she moved out of big farm medical. She's no longer doing medicine that way, but I know that God's using her brilliance to help people in a more holistic way. So same thing. Meat Mafia boys, same thing. God's taking them from what they went to college for and bringing them into a space where they can help more people. Mm-hmm. And so look for people that were mainstreamed that have made the shift, because something has happened there, and usually it's very spiritual, and that's a good thing.
I think that we're moving in the right direction with a certain part of the culture here where people like yourself are, podcasting. You're kind of preaching to the people that are wanting to listen to the podcast, mm-hmm. to eat healthy.
Yes.
Which is completely different than like my granddad and my dad did.
Right.
They were influences on each other, but my granddad, I don't know if you know his story. I'm going to tell it really quickly.
Do we have time?
We have to wrap it up, but quickly, yeah.
Well, he lived to be 95 years old, and he didn't die because of cardiovascular illness. He was never prescribed a single prescription in his life, and he died at 95 because he quit drinking water, because he had a wreck in Lubbock, and he was going to have to get glasses and hearing aids. At 95, that's not so bad. But he said, I've had a really good life. I'm not going to spend the money I have, saved on the medical system. And he said, and he had his whole family with him. And he said, if you'll just let me quit drinking water, I'm letting you know that I'm ready to go. And he did. He died in 3 days.
Wow.
But as opposed to his dad, who, as we talked about with Texas Tech, and he grain finished all the animals. He used tons of chemicals on all this. He ended up having 2 sextuplet bypasses. Most people never hear that. They hear, triple bypass or quadruple bypass, but all 6 of the arteries. And he had it done twice. And then he died in his 80s. And radically different, hundreds of thousands and thousands of dollars, and quality of life, as our age. Weldon just went to his 50th went to his 50th high school reunion. 1/3 of his entire class had already died.
Yeah.
He was the only person who's not on any medications, any pharmaceuticals at all, of that entire graduating class.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And what are we doing that's different? I mean, they all were raised in the same. We're still exposed to glyphosate. We're still exposed to all those environmental hazards. We're eating healthy. Mm-hmm. We're connected to our food.
Eating healthy, being outside.
Yeah,
and
being
getting
outside.
vitamin D from the sun.
Yep.
Yeah.
Clean water.
Riding our bikes everywhere.
Well, thank you two so much for joining.
Thank
if you could just
you,
tell
Ryan.
listeners where to find you all, that would be a good time.
Oh, holycowbeef.com is our website. And reaching out to us directly is the best way. So info@holycowbeef.com, and also order if you want to place an order. But anyways, if you'll reach out to the guys in the office, they'll send either an order form or they'll just help you work the website so that you can order directly from the website. So
thank you.
yes,
We appreciate
thank you,
it very
Ryan.
much. And good luck to your customers. I mean, to your audience.
The audience, yes.
Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more.